So as we get started, what are you hoping to accomplish tonight in your investment journey? What are you guys hoping to do? Do you have any specific goals? Anything that you're trying to accomplish as far as portfolio? Just get your first one? Okay. So in buying a home, an investment home is actually not as hard as it sounds, but it does take some planning. And so you really do want to make sure that you set yourself up for success on these things, short-term and long-term. And so tonight we're going to actually talk through 3 different models. We're going to talk through the client model, we're going to talk through the financial model, and then we're going to talk through the management model. And all this stuff, you are going to see a lot of it in the package that's on the table that you can actually download. And then as we go through this tonight, if you have more questions, this will be up on my YouTube channel at some point, so that you can go ahead and download and look at it again if you'd like to. And certainly I'm around for questions to help out throughout the process and get you set up for success. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. This truly is just informational. I'm not going to be putting you in any kind of headlock to help you get going on this, but if you'd like to have more information, I'm certainly more than happy to get you going. So these are the pieces that we're going to be talking about right here: client model, financial model, management model, and then building wealth through real estate. What does that look like, and how does that really get you set up for buying your house? And what does it mean? What does it mean to build wealth through real estate? We're going to talk about what that means tonight too, because this is a great conversation to have. And I'll tell you a real quick story about the whole situation. My parents bought their first home back in, oh my goodness, I was like probably 12 at the time. Bought our first home when my parents were 12, and when I was 12, when my parents were 12, when I was 12, and it seemed like forever. The house was not in the greatest shape. And because my parents lived internationally, sometimes they would leave the country, be gone for periods of time, and they would rent the house out. And I just remember it being an absolute disaster for my poor parents, because they didn't rent it out. They didn't understand what they were getting into, and they would get themselves into all sorts of trouble with these houses. They would have to evict tenants. They would have to do massive repairs. People would trash the house. We had people sunbathing themselves on the roof. I mean, like, you just can't possibly pick a worse scenario than what my parents did when they were renting out their house. But they had no clue. They had no clue. It was trial and error for them. They had no idea what was happening. Fast forward, to 40 years, because I'm 52 now, so they're 12 to 52. And what ended up happening is this rental unit that they have is actually been like a godsend for them, like a tremendous thing, because when I grew up, we lived very meagerly, and I didn't even have a bed until I was in 5. So it was we lived very meagerly. And this house was a tremendous thing. And fast forward to retirement, this has been a huge subsidy for them, helping them get through the retirement years into the space that they're in right now. And so this is truly something you can do. It truly is an opportunity for you to build wealth in the process. But more than that, it's about financial stability. But it can be scary. It can be terribly scary getting into investment, because what are some of the things that you think of when you think of investments? Risk, right? Okay, like what?
Not turning out to be profitable.
Not turning out to be profitable, okay. And that is a case, but anybody else have another one?
Just all the things that come with repairs and not having connections and being able to do it efficiently.
Right.
Upside down, kind of get it turned upside down.
Yeah, getting into the right spot, okay. That makes total sense, because if you don't pick the house right, you can get yourself into a boatload of problems, not even knowing that you're getting yourself into those problems, right? Okay, what about client management? Is that somebody's nightmare? Okay, just so you know, I'm actually in the middle of suing my past tenants. I'm in the middle of it. They destroyed, I made the mistake of letting some college kids in. They destroyed it. Now, luckily, I had a huge deposit, so I covered most of what they destroyed. I mean, how do you get spray paint on a house? I mean, literally, there was graffiti on the outside of the house. They destroyed siding. It was terrible. Luckily, I knew what I was doing getting into this. Guess who co-signed? All the parents. Guess who I can go after now to get my money back? Okay, so you have to think through where you're headed with each one of these pieces in order to be able to set yourself up for success. But let's play a little game here real quick. So why don't you go ahead and jump in on this question right here and answer the question. So go ahead and scan this, and and we'll find out your answer here in a second of what this is. This is just a game so we can kind of get to know each other. And I think the question is what is your superpower? Is that what it is? Because I forgot to write that down. What is your superpower? Okay, good. So, all right, so tell me your superpowers. And I'm thinking more like Justice League and DC Comics and stuff like that. The last group thought I meant like productivity and I love numbers and stuff like that. Okay, that's okay, but I'm not really referring to that. Give me some Justice League kind of stuff. What are your superpowers? Go ahead, fill it out. It'll show up on the screen and I'll tell you.
So you're asking us to be lazy.
That's exactly what I'm doing, yeah. Ooh, telekinesis. What is that? Oh, that's awesome. That is super cool. Read people's minds, okay. Invisible, all right. Gift of gab. Come on, guys. Heat vision. So you got some infrared going on here. All right, fantastic. All right, fantastic. All right, let's keep moving here. So we're going to talk about first-time investors here from the standpoint of what this really means and what it does. Because most people, when they think investments, what do you usually think when you're thinking investments? Stock market. That's good. That's what everybody thinks, right? But what happens with the stock market? It fluctuates, right? Well, real estate does do some of the same things, but there are some advantages that you have when it comes to investing into real estate that you don't have with the stock market. So, but let's talk about the stock market real quick, because the stock market, many times what you're running into with it is that you're running into situations where if you would have bought Google back when, would you be sitting fat and happy? Would you even be working today? Probably not, right? You'd be doing something fun or doing something along the lines of your passion instead of having to get up every day and work. But when you bought Google, there were two aspects of Google, right? There's appreciation, because if you had bought it back then, right now it's probably worth 300 times more than what it was when it was first offered. But how much risk was there when you would have bought Google back at that point? We all knew about Google at that point, but did we all buy it? We had no clue whether it was going to be a good investment or not. But guess what? It appreciated over time. Now, the second thing that happened with Google is you started getting dividends, right? And dividends started showing up in the form of little cash bonuses that people would give as it got done with quarterly based off of profits. The same thing happens with housing. You get a monthly rent check. Because so if you bought an investment home, like I bought an investment home probably 4 years ago now, that home right now, if I were to turn around and sell it right now, I would be able to make about $70,000 more in equity than when I bought it 4 years ago. Fantastic, no different than Google, right? Google went up in the same way. Now, I've been getting dividends every single month that has been in the form of a rent check. Now, I had to give some of it back because I had to deal with repairs and some of these other things that happened with the house. But guess what? I still made some money with that, like pretty decent money. Now, that same principle gets one extra compounding effect when you're doing real estate investments. Because with real estate investments, what ends up happening is that you get one additional opportunity in what's called depreciation. You can get a depreciable asset, meaning that you get a tax advantage year over year over year over year that helps you reduce your overall tax burden on this house. Now, we're going to go into some of this as far as what that's concerned, but let's start talking about the client model. Because the client model is, most people want to start with a house, right? Everybody like, well, let's go look at houses. That's not where you need to start. You don't need to start with a house. you need to start with a client. And I'll tell you why. Because you're going to have to decide what your needs are with this client. Are you going to be looking for cash flow, or are you going to be looking for appreciation? Because just like stocks, you're going to find that some stocks are great at dividends, but they're not going to get a whole lot of appreciation. Okay? And you can go back and look at the stock market. You can look at Coca-Cola. You can look at Pepsi. You can look at, I don't know what else is out there. I don't handle a lot of that myself, but you kind of get the idea, is that some of them are going to get some dividends on a regular basis, but some of them are not necessarily going to be dividend driven. They're going to be more appreciation. And so you're going to have to decide, just like stocks, which one makes the most sense to you, because the client group that you pick is going to play into one or the other. Now, everybody wants both, but it's going to be heavier on one side or heavier on the other side. And you're going to have to pick based off of the demographic and what it is that you're trying to accomplish with this house. And it all comes down to this, the client model bell curve. Now, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I'm going to lead you through the process of thinking through the client level bell curve. Because this right here, is the success on whether you're going to be making a profit on this house or you're not going to be making a profit on this house. It's a huge deal. And here's what we get into. The client model on the leading third. So this leading third right here, let's put it into concepts that we know as far as housing. Okay? The leading third would be Hopewell, Colonial Heights, Petersburg, where the home prices are a little bit lower, a little easier to get into. You can put money into these properties, but what would be some of the characteristics of the people who are going to be living in these properties? Some of the characteristics are they're going to have a little bit harder time with job stability, right? They're going to be having to decide whether to pay you or to eat, right? And you may find some other things along the way that are in their way of being able to make rent payments. Now, I do need to let you know, though, that if you bought a home in Petersburg, especially if you bought one in Petersburg 2 years ago, your cash flow on that house would be tremendous. You would have a tremendous margin because you would have bought a $150,000 home or a $200,000 home, and you would be making very small payments, and your payment on that property would be somewhere in the $700 to $800 range, but your income on that would be $1,500. So you'd be doubling your income on something like that very, very, very quickly. So you're going to get high margin, but you're also going to get some of the characteristics that come with this leading edge, which the characteristics are going to be a little bit more of a headache. You might have to chase them around town to get paid. You might have to deal with certain aspects of their instabilities, okay? And you may get some higher turnover because $50 a month means a whole lot at that stage. Nothing wrong with that group, just keep in mind that there are some problems here. Now, having said that, there is a segment within this leading edge that appears to have a lot of risk, but many times does not have as much risk as you think. For example, we have a huge contingency in this country where we have people who are coming in across the border who don't have documentation. Okay? Those people need a place to live. Those people don't want to be deported. Those people want to make sure that they're safe in a home and that they have a low payment on the home. That client group will take care of the home just as good as if it was yours, as if it was theirs. And many times their payments are not only on time, but they're ahead of time. Some of the international community, like of Eastern descent, will prepay an entire year up front. So you're getting your cash up front for the entire year, $19,000, $20,000 for an entire year's rent. Think about that. Is there much risk with that? Not as much as you think. So there are sections within this demographic that are not necessarily a bad section to get into, because you pick your sections and you can also go into some of these and play through these sections as far as understanding what their needs are and be able to help them out. Another piece of that specific demographic is that many of them are coming here specifically to work. And so they're willing to rent by the room instead of rent by the whole house, which means that if you have a 4-bedroom house, you can get $800 per bedroom, and think about your cash flow in that case. But you have to be willing to take a little bit of risk in order to set yourself up with that demographic. So kind of think through that leading edge, because that leading edge does have some problems with it, but at the same point in time, there are a lot of benefits in that leading edge as well that can actually make it very simple for you. And if you put the processes in place and you have the documentation well laid out, you're actually going to be fairly safe, whether you believe it or not. You're going to be very safe in that demographic. Now, I know people personally that have over 300 rentals in this demographic, in this space, in this leading edge. And think about it from this standpoint. 300 rentals, if you made $1,000 per rental above your cost, think about your monthly income. How much of a headache is it really? Okay? So you have to kind of think through the process of where you're headed with this. Now, not all of us are there. We're all just getting started. So this may be something that you have to consider as you're going into that leading third. Now, the middle third, this is where most people that are starting out, this is where I encourage you to go as far as looking at this. It doesn't mean that you can't start in that beginning third, just understand what your risks are. This middle third is where I kind of like to play. This little middle third right here. So I would put this in the concept of a home starting at about 300,000 going up to about 500,000. That's going to be that middle third. So you're going to be dealing with places like maybe Regency right over here, Regency Mall, maybe some areas like North Chesterfield, maybe some areas like Glen Allen, okay? Some of those spaces like that, where you're going to be dealing with people that are a little bit more semi-professional or professional. Their job stability is going to be a little bit more determined, especially as you get towards the leading edge or the higher end edge of this client group. You're going to find that they're going to be very, very easy to work with, and that they're not going to be terribly hard to get your money from. But at the same point in time, think about the house price range that you're dealing with here. It's a little harder to get a little bit more juice out of that squeeze. It makes it a little bit harder to get a little bit more out of that to make that work, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad place to be because it's predictable. Now, in this area down here, think about this as Google when it first launched. And now you think of this in the middle years of Google. Okay? Depending on where you buy, it could make a huge difference. Does anybody remember Churchill back in 2003? Would anybody have wanted to completely live in Churchill in 2003? It was a pretty rough area, wasn't it? I had a client buy in Churchill in 2013, and I thought she was crazy. And I mean this. I drove up on the there's that park on 27th, right around there. And as I'm coming up around 27th, I'm coming up to her house. She's right up against the park. There was a guy getting jumped out in the middle of the park, and they were pummeling this guy. And I thought, this is nuts. You're buying, and it was a single lady. And I'm like, this is nuts. Why are you buying this house? And I told her when I walked in, every sign of the papers, I said, I think you're a visionary because I don't see it. I'm glad you think you're going to do this. And well, guess what? 2013, she sold it in 2019. She made a boatload of money. She bought it for like $160,000. 2019, she made a boatload, an absolute boatload in less than a decade. Now, this middle age right here, this middle portion is slightly different because now you're starting to getting into the Churchill of now or the North Chesterfield of now. North Chesterfield kind of had some parts that were pretty bad as well, but now it's actually looking really good. And you're buying homes in that 300 category where they have stable jobs, everything's looking good. Okay, so this is a really good leading edge to get into. Now, the closer you get to this top edge right over here and you start migrating into the lagging third, now you're starting to get into more of that luxury market. Luxury market like Wyndham, okay, where you're starting at 500 to 600. Those people, there is complete job stability. There's no worries about it, but the home prices are actually pretty high. you're getting into a situation where it makes it a little harder to get into that market. But this market right here is a huge appreciation market. Huge appreciation, but you're not going to have a ton of cash flow over here. Because in this area, the cash flow, I mean, if your payment's, $2,500 and you're only getting $2,800 in rent, you're really not making a whole lot on it. But they are going to take care of the home. You're not going to have to chase them around for checks. You're not going to have to do a lot of things that you would have to do with some of these other places down over here. So this really does make sense. Now, as you start thinking about the homes that you want to buy, you really need to be thinking about it in these client models. Because these client models will help you understand where your tolerance is for risk and where your tolerance is for the reward. Now, if you're like, I'm doubling down on Google in the early days, then you're going to love Hopewell. Because Hopewell is in the middle of a revitalization right now. Back in 2013, you could have bought an entire city block for $50,000. Right now, one house down there is about $200,000. And it's still very affordable. And they're just getting ready to revitalize the entire city. And so as that happens, you're going to start seeing that entire place start moving up. That could be the beginnings of Google, but there is risk, right? There's risk. We don't know what we're dealing with that. Now, as you get into the lagging third, these people over here, the downside with the lagging third or the more of the luxury market is that they're going to expect everything to be perfect. They are not going to tolerate a missing hand knob. They're not going to be tolerating a lock on your bathroom that doesn't function. They're just not going to tolerate anything. So the downside with this is that you're going to get a lot of calls, not because there's anything seriously wrong with the house, but because they want it fixed. They're paying whatever it is, and they expect to get it fixed. These guys are a little bit easier on that. These guys just don't want to raise the rent, okay? So kind of thinking through that model, that kind of helps you understand what you're dealing with when it comes to the house itself. Now, there is a form that I did load into here, and this is straight out of the book Hold. And this form right here is actually designed to help you kind of understand your opportunities and the different models that are associated with each one of them. And so like up here, you can see taxes, renters laws, weather, how that affects the locality that you're going to be in, whether there's taxes. Like, for example, I know the city of Ashland, I believe city of Ashland has 2 taxes, one for the county, one for the city. So you kind of have to think about how that works, because that does eat into what you're looking to accomplish. The reason why this is important too is a lot of people are like, I know one guy who loves condos. Well, guess what? Condos are in a huge problem right now. If everybody remembers the problem in Miami, you guys remember Miami where that entire condo building just kind of fell down? Okay. That whole thing happened because they didn't take care of the exterior of the building. And the salt air got into the building, corroded all the rebar, and then all of a sudden a little wind knocked the whole thing over. And so what you're facing with this is, if you're starting to get into some of these models, you have to think and understand the whole picture of what you're dealing with, because the homeowners associations on condos are about to go through the roof. Because what's happening with the condos is that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are no longer willing to put up with situations like those condos. They don't want to insure those. They don't want loans associated, because guess what? Whoever held the loans on those condos, they just lost everything. Not only the owners, but also the banks. And so the banks are starting to make it a little harder for you to get into certain ones with associations, because they want to make sure that they have reserves, that they have other things like that. This right here kind of helps you think through, do I really want to get set into something like that? Because if you got something in Wyndham, or let's say you get in Wellesley, they have a homeowners association dues of between $150 and $300. And so that's going to eat into your profits, and you really need to think through whether that's something that you're willing to do or not. Okay? So in this client model, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the properties, as well as the opportunities and threats to the business model, is going to be extremely important. And that all plays into the client model itself. Now, here's another question right here that we want to get in. I forgot which question this is, though, so I'm going to have to look that up. I'd love to get your response on it. What is the question? I can't remember off the top of my head.
You're a hot dog shipwreck.
Oh, yes.
Starving, you eat yourself.
Getting in touch with your 9-year-old self.
Only if I had mustard.
Fun times for sure. All right, fantastic. It looks like the no's are the winners still. We got 67% saying that no, you would not eat yourself. I guess that's the way it works. Nobody's going to eat themselves. All right, so getting into the financial model now. What is the financial model? Well, this is pretty much understanding, number one, how to qualify, how to understand the cash flow, how to understand how the depreciation works for you, and how the appreciation is actually going to help you going into the future. And so there's some definite benefits to this. And so when it comes to buying a house, we're going to talk about traditional means to buy one of these homes as far as an investment property. The traditional means are kind of like this. When you're getting into buying a home, like I did with my first investment home, you can get in with as little as 15% down. Now, there is an option where a lot of people use this instead, that if they already own a home, what they do is they take the home that they're living in, they convert it to a rental, and then now they only need 3 to 5% to get into the next one. And so a lot of people will take that path instead. So their first home, what they try to do is just get a home that could easily turn into a rental. They don't fall completely in love with it. They just try to set themselves up for success so that what they can do is convert that one to a rental and then move into the next one. Now, here's the beauty of this, is if you go into that concept, you can actually go in and buy a multi-unit property and do it with 3.5%. 3.5%, and then you can use, and I have so many people that do this, they use the rent from one of the units to help pay for the entire thing, and then what they do is they live in one. After being in the property for 1 full year, they convert the whole property to a rental unit, and then they move into the next home. And then if you start with a multi-unit up front, it's real easy because the cash is a little bit less than if you buy it the other way, which is if you do multi-unit later, you have to put 25% down. And so it's a fantastic way if you are looking to do this and you have the ability to get into a multi-unit up front, it is a great way to get into it. Now the downside is that you can't use first-time homebuyer loans when you're getting into multi-units. So you do have to come up with a 3.5%. But let's say you already own the home that you really want to stay in, and all you're looking to do is buy the next one. So that means that you could actually get in with 15% down as the bare minimum. Now terms start getting more and more attractive the more money you put down. Like I just had somebody do a 30% down on an investment property, and his terms were almost as good as owner occupant, meaning that his interest rate was almost in a 6.5% range, which is actually tremendous when most investments right now are closer to 7, 7.25. And so this was a great way to get in. Some of the downsides with this is that once you get into buying an investment home, you're no longer going to be getting any sort of gifts. In other words, you can't crowdfund at this point. You're no longer crowdfunding. You're not getting grandpa and grandma to help you. You're not getting somebody else to jump in with you. If they're not on the loan, they can't contribute towards it. Because one of the big reasons why is if you go back to the crash of 2009. During the crash of 2009, one of the biggest issues that happened back then is that they were crowdsourcing from a bunch of different places, and the people truly couldn't afford the house. And so when the economy changed, a lot of these investors just turned in the keys and walked away. And so that created a huge problem, especially in Nevada. I don't know if you guys remember Nevada or out in Las Vegas where there was a huge housing glut. That's what was happening is investors were coming in, they were crowdsourcing, crowdfunding the down payments, and then it was cheaper for them to walk away from the earnest money deposit because a lot of these were new homes. They walked away from all of them, leaving a massive glut of homes that needed to be built and a massive glut of homes that they simply just walked away from the deposit or the down payment from. So no more gifts. No gifts can be used. You have to use your own money. Now, the great news is that if you're buying a home that you're going to be using as an investment property, you can actually offset the payment with the rent that you're going to be receiving. And so if your monthly payment on the house is going to be, let's say, $2,000, just to use a round number, and you can use $3,000, let's say you can get $3,000 in rent, you can actually use the $3,000 to offset the monthly payment, and in essence, not even have to, prove that you have additional income or have to support both houses by yourself in order to do that. And the same thing happens when you're departing residence. Let's say if you want to convert your departing residence to an investment property and you're going to move into the new primary, it's the same concept. You can do the same thing. You can actually get a lease on the property that you're leaving. It doesn't have to be for the same date. Okay, you can do it a month after you move into the new one, but you can get a lease on the departing residence. And in essence, what that does is that offsets whatever payment that you have there, so that all you have to do is afford the new house. It's a great way to help you get in. And then you can also ask for the seller for seller concessions. So right now we're actually in a little bit of a dip. We've actually seen a lot of people going through the situation right now where the houses aren't selling as fast. And we actually have seen people coming in asking for seller concessions. What that means is we go to Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we say, hey, we're going to buy your house for $250,000, but we want 2% back to cover all our legal fees for the transfer. You can ask for up to 2%. That would be $5,000 in essence, and that would give you the opportunity to come out of pocket with a little bit less in order to be able to buy that home. And that is a strategy that does work. We have a lot of people that employ that. Now, from a traditional standpoint, it is 15, 20, 25, and then 25 is a standard for the multi-units as you're getting into those. In the financial model, what I highly recommend is that once you understand and you've gotten to the point to where you can really understand what it is that you're willing to pay for a house, you've identified the client model that you're really going for, that you're going after a very specific demographic, and that you know where you want to be, now you need to do what's called a rent analysis. You need to find out if you can truly get enough rent out of this property to make sure that it covers what it is that you're looking to buy. And this is probably one of the most important analyses that you can actually set yourself up with. The place that you would really want to start looking this over is, I would encourage you to go to any of these places right here, realtor.com, zillow.com, rentometer, biggerpockets.com, any of these places right here you can go to, and you can actually, these are paid for, but these you can actually get some really good information for free. And in the Zillow rental page that they have, you can actually see what homes are listed in the area, and you can find out what it is that the market is actually willing to bear. And so this is a huge, when I bought my first rental, which I bought over near Regency, right over here, what I did is I studied the market for like 3 weeks, understanding what each segment of the market would hold and what each market would be willing to bear if I were to buy a home in that area. So I looked at this area. I'm the guy that likes that middle third once again. So I looked at that middle third, and I looked and I tried to understand what was happening over here, trying in the areas and the pockets that I wanted to buy in. And I did an analysis based on Zillow and realtor.com. Here's what I found, especially in this market right now. There's not a whole lot of rentals, especially single family homes. There's just not a lot of them. And those that are there, many of them are very, very, very expensive. It's hard to believe what you can get for rent down by Regency. It's unbelievable. I was charging $2,500 in rent down there, and the neighbor was charging $2,800, and he got it. I couldn't believe it. But you do have to consider this, because the higher your rent, the more likely you are to get turnover. And so you're going to have to kind of go through this and look at it very carefully and make sure that your amenities and what you're putting into the house and how you're presenting it to the client makes a whole lot of sense. There's also some things that you need to consider that I didn't know about when I first got started in renting as a landlord perspective. And that was, I went and talked to somebody who had a lot of rentals, and I asked him, I said, what do I need to do as for these renters? And he says if you've got more than just electric and water, he says you need to get rid of the gas. And I didn't know why. And really what it comes down to is that it's best to have just 2 bills than 3 bills, because the people get behind on the bills. So I just thought I'd share that. That one's for free. All right. Now with these right here, you can pull in and you can start analyzing the rent in the area, and it'll give you a really good perspective on what it is that not only you can charge, but also what the market is demanding. Now, the next piece that you can do with this, and this comes straight out of this book right here, Hold, and this is a calculator that you can actually use that will help you understand whether this house is worth the money or not. Now, in the QR code, I put an Excel sheet that actually has this in it that I built. I'm not going to tell you the Excel sheet's awesome, but it does work. Okay, the Excel sheet, what it does, and I'm going to sidetrack for a second, and I'm going to show you this Excel sheet so that you can kind of see how this works. And so I'm going to go in. And here is the sheet. And this Excel sheet can actually help you. I'm just going to pull up Grayson because I did that for somebody else. And you'll get to see the property. So this was for 33. Can you see that? It's probably a little small. 334 Grayson Street. You guys see it? Is it big enough? Okay. And the person was buying it for $279. They were going to put 25% down, and that meant that their down payment was going to be $69,000 plus the legal fees. And I added $6,000 in points just to make sure that I knew that we could do this. Okay. We were going to do it for 360 payments, which was 30 years. I ran the mortgage calculator, and the mortgage calculator came up with a payment of $1,824, which means that annually they were going to be spending $21,888 on the mortgage for this house, including taxes and insurance. The maximum they felt like they could get for a payment was $1,900. You can see there's not a huge difference right there. And then their total cash in was going to be $85,000 with a very small appreciation rate of 4.4%. With a depreciation, and then the income that they would generate on this property, the cash flow was minimal at best. And it didn't make sense to buy it. Because with a 1% return on investment or $900 a year, if your water heater breaks, you're not even covering the water heater. And so these are some of the analyses that you need to really be looking at. Now here's another one. You can see this one actually had a negative return. Okay, this one had a negative return, which didn't end up working. Here's a duplex in Petersburg that I did. Now, once again, Petersburg's a different animal. Here's the duplex, 216, 25% down, $54,000. This would be your payment. That would be your payment over the age of the house. These are unit 1, $1,050, unit 2, $1,050. So you're getting a total of $24,000, $25,200. Here is your total cash in. Here's a 4%. Now, just so you know, this year in the Richmond area, they're expecting a 7% return in appreciation, which means that this house would actually go up higher, but this is Petersburg, so we used a 4.4 just to kind of keep it in line. Depreciation, he decided to do an $11,500 depreciation. This is his actual income for the year. And then this was his cash flow return on investment. Now, this cash flow return on investment is pretty good. I don't even think Google has a 14% return on investment. Now, Google has significant appreciation if you bought it back when it was in the early days. But right now, if you were to buy Google, would you get any appreciation out of it? Probably not a whole lot, because it's probably gotten to the point where it's peaked, right? You might get some more, but it's really, unless the stock splits, there's really not a whole lot more hope for Google. Now, with this home, the first year return on investment is 45%. When you're looking at the first year return on investment, what they're doing is looking at your cash in, and then they're turning around and taking your cash in, and then they're bringing it all the way down to the investment that you see down there, adding all the income, the taxable benefits, and everything else, and a 45% return on investment is what it kicks out. And that's actually a pretty good return on investment. Now getting back, because I want to make sure that I put that into here, but I do need to let you know that it's not a perfect worksheet, and so there may be bugs. If you have a better one and want to load it up, I'm certainly all ears on it, but you're certainly welcome to use the one that I have, and it has been loaded into that Google Drive. So that's the financial model, and this is the long form. Showing you kind of how that worked right there. I just showed you in person how that worked, and to give you the math on how that would be set up. So there's one more question here, and then we're going to wrap this up with the final model. If you have, this is a new one I just added last night. You can see I ran out of ideas, so I pulled from my 9-year-old self. Have I missed anything along the way that you were hoping to hear more about? Anybody? Not yet? Okay.
I am curious about depreciation.
Depreciation. Okay.
We assume that any property have a depreciation
Mm-hmm.
with the demand that we have all the time. That's what I was assuming.
That there is depreciation, or that?
No depreciation because the demand is all the time continuous, so the property gain value all the time.
So that's a great question. So that's different than the depreciation that I'm referring to in here. Okay. The depreciation that you're talking about is kind of like the real estate cycle in 2009 when prices were going up and then all of a sudden they came down because of a crash.
Yes.
That's a very different piece than the depreciation I'm referring to. The there's no guarantee that homes are going to go consistently up. Now, it has been very stable, and it generally is very stable. But I mean, there are ghost towns. There still are ghost towns out there. It's because entire cities or towns, something happened, shut the entire place down, so you lose your entire investment at that point in time. So that is a possibility. And we saw in 2009 that there can be depreciation when it comes to properties like that too. But what I'm referring to when I say the depreciation on your schedule or what you're looking at here is it's very different. It's very different, that depreciation, because in essence, what we're going to be doing with that depreciation is we're actually taking advantage of the tax code. And in the tax code, what you can do is you can take the property, and let's say that you start off with a basis. And I'm not a CPA, so don't take what I'm doing with this as gospel. I just know that you can do it. And every property is slightly different. Like my property, we took you can do a straight line depreciation, means over a long period of time, or you can do an immediate depreciation. You have to talk to the CPA about that. I decided to do a long-term depreciation straight line. So what I did is we took the lifetime value of the home, okay, which the IRS allows you 27.5 years. We divided the basis, which I bought it for $335,000, and we divided that by those 27.5 years. And that gave me how much I can depreciate per year on that house. Okay? Now, having said that, if I go in and I have to put an enormous amount of money into this house, like I'm going to have to put a roof on the house probably in the next 10 years. I'm going to have to put a new heating and cooling system into the house in the next 10 years. I'm probably going to have to I had to do some tree removal just recently, and that tree removal was like $2,600. I can add that to the basis and amplify how much I'm writing off over that period of time. Because there's only so much, the IRS will only let you take so many hard costs against the house. So in other words, I can write the trees off completely because that was $2,500. But if I had $25,000 worth of repairs that I was doing to this house, they're not likely going to let me take $25,000 immediately. So I would add that to the basis of the home and depreciate it every year. Now that goes against my W-2 income or my net income at year end, and allows me to get set up for success and reduce my taxes. So when you're considering the house, you have to look at it not only from how much possible appreciation you're going to get every year, which this year in this market is 7%, but you have to look at how much can I depreciate it, and then do I have opportunities to add to that depreciation? Because after you get to 27 and a half years, guess what? You can't depreciate the house anymore. According to the federal government, there's nothing left to depreciate. So when you see a lot of these flippers or you see a lot of these investors go into homes and completely remodel them after the home is, that's because they're taking advantage of the new depreciation model. They've expired all of their old depreciation. Now they're adding new stuff in. Does that make sense? And so now they get another taxable advantage. They've upgraded the home. They lifted the value of the home at the same point in time, and then they can get a better quality client. Does that help?
Yes.
Did I cover what you're hoping for?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else before I move into how to manage your rental? Okay, great. So how to manage your rental. You actually have a couple different options. And when I first started thinking about managing my own rental, I actually looked at this from the standpoint of hiring somebody to do it. Because heck no, did I ever want to deal with some of these renters and landlords. Because most of the time, all we hear is the horror stories. All we hear is the horror stories like the one I shared about me having to sue these kids, right? But here's the great news about that whole process. I went 24 months and got one phone call. One phone call with some tenants. 24 months. All I had to do was show up and cash checks. I didn't have to call them once. So it's not always that you have a really bad tenant, but sometimes you do get them. And when you do get them, as long as your contracts are set up and you do the due diligence up front, you have recourse to be able to get it done. I had built up enough of a pot of savings to where I could actually go in and do all the work, get a new tenant in, get a new tenant in place, move on, and then go back legally and pursue them for the repairs, which made it so much simpler than having to sit back and worry and fret about everything. Now, when you're dealing with professionally managed properties, nothing wrong with that, but you need to know that most of these places are going to charge 8 to 10%. That means that if you're charging $2,000 a month in rent, they're going to take $200 away from that every single month. Now, if you have the leading edge client that's a lot of work, maybe that's not a bad idea because the margin is there, right? You're getting $1,500, you're giving away $150, you're keeping $600. It's not necessarily a big deal at that point. You've got some good cash flow. And you're not having to chase people around. They're going to manage your contracts. They're going to take care of collections. They're going to handle maintenance requests. You're still going to pay for it, but they're going to handle maintenance requests. They're going to communicate with them. They're going to do turnover inspections. They have their network. Everything is set up. Okay, everything is in good place, but you're losing 10% of your income to them. Now I looked at that, and then I looked at self-managed. I have to handle my own contract. I have to handle my point of sale. I have to handle collections. I have to handle maintenance. I have to handle all these other pieces. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to try it. Let's see how it turns out. And I got one phone call in 2 years. And it was for something really, really stupid. It was really simple. Now, I saved myself 10% by not necessarily having to deal with it. But I had to set myself up correctly up front by making sure that I had a really strong contract, that I knew how to manage the system and manage the payments and record the payments. Because guess what? 6 months from now, you don't remember a blasted thing you told that person. You have to have a place where you can control the narrative and make sure that the narrative is working. Make sense? And so that's pretty important. Now, collections, I hope you never run into that. Depending on which client group you're going to work into, you may find somebody like that. Just remember, it's your house. So if you have spidey senses going off on this thing, make sure that you just kind of move on to the next tenant. Okay, that's all I can say. Trust your gut on it because you just never know. And then the maintenance requests and the tenant communications. Now, these are big deals for you to kind of play with, but here's the piece that you can actually go, if you do go do the professionally managed, a lot of real estate companies will actually do these for you. So like the hometowns of the world, but there are other places. Dodson is a big one here in town that you can actually go to. You can go to online entities, local management agencies, or you can do some of these right here, Hemlane, TurboTenant, Buildium, Tenant Turner. All these do have places. Now where I go is I actually go different. I actually go to Zillow Rental Manager and to apartments.com. Here's the reason why. Zillow Rental Manager will actually vet the client for you. Zillow Rental Manager, when you put your listing on Zillow, they have to pay $25 to have a credit report run so that they can apply for that rental. That's actually a really big deal, because otherwise you have to send it somewhere else and get a credit report. You have to figure out how to read this. You have to do this. You have to do that. They send you the most basic credit report. It doesn't give you a ton of information, but it does tell you whether they have any warrants. It does tell you whether they have any collections. It does tell you whether they have any evictions. It tells you whether they have any judgments. It gives you a credit score number that you can rely on. It gives you some good information so that you can understand what is the best way to get this set up, and if you really want to work with these people or not. So this Zillow Rental Manager is beautiful, and it's actually widely accepted in the community. And so people go to the Zillow Rental Manager all the time, Zillow Rentals, to actually find their next rental. Okay, now keep in mind that if you're trying to rent a property out, it can take 60 to 90 days to get a tenant in, just because it takes some time to get the applications in, to vet the client, make sure that that happens. And all the really good clients are the ones that are planning ahead, meaning that they're working around school cycles. Okay, so if you have a rental that's coming out in April, you may want to try to plan for June, because the school cycles play a huge role in when people move. People are not going to move in the holidays. They do move, don't get me wrong, they do move, but those are not necessarily the ones you want. The ones, like the first tenant that I had was actually a doctor who was moving in to do his residency at Henrico Doctors. And he signed a 2-year lease. It was fantastic. He signed it to move in June. He actually didn't move in until July, but he signed it to move in June. But he did it moving from Alabama, because it was the way it was set up. He had planned ahead, he knew what was going on, and he applied through the rental manager. And the great thing is everybody who applies, you get to see who they are, and you can discount them right away without even talking to them. You can just hit a button and tell them that you're going on to somebody else, that you're not using them, you're not going to go with them. Sometimes we got some really rough credit ones, but sometimes we got some really good ones that actually helped us get in there. Now, I use this one to vet the client and also to list the property. When you're getting ready to list the property, you do need to make sure that you take very clean and very good photographs. In other words, don't go in and do it with an iPhone. Make sure you get a professional photographer, spend $150, $200, get some really good pictures of the house, because that'll actually help you get a higher quality client. Okay? Now, personally, I use Rental Manager, Zillow Rental Manager, to vet the client. I use apartments.com to manage, because their online platform for managing the client is super slick. The communication is perfect. When I was working with these kids that were renting the house, they didn't want to put the electric bill in their name. They wanted me to handle the electric bill. So guess what? Every time I got the electric bill, I actually went into the apartments.com or rental tools, and I listed the next electric bill, and they paid for it. And it was perfect. I didn't have to do anything to do it. And it was simple. Literally took me 15 to 20 minutes just to do everything I needed to do to get it set up. And then they can go in and they can connect to the portal, and they can make their payments right through the portal. So now at year end, it makes it real easy for accounting, because you can see exactly how much they paid, exactly how much you billed. You can go right into it. And like, for example, I load the contracts in here so that everybody has a contract. Any addendums go in here. Any communication we have goes in here. All that stuff goes right into apartments.com, so that I'm able to, at the end of this, if there is any kind of quabble, which I have not had yet, other than with these kids, that you have an opportunity to be able to work this out with them and be able to set it up so that you have a really good conversation as to how to make this work. Okay?
Can I ask a question with that?
Yeah.
Have you ever had them put the bills in their own name so you don't really?
I prefer that.
Yeah.
I prefer that, but with college kids, many times it's, you know, there are 4 different people making payments, and mom and dad are helping out. And,
So
but
it's not
but
all the kids, you prefer to go putting it in their own name?
yeah, I don't want to do it in my name. If I could have had the college kids do it in their name, I would have done it. But for simplicity, okay. So here's the problem with college kids: they all leave for Christmas break. Guess what they do with the heat and the cooling?
You get all checked out.
They shut it off.
Um,
Can your house freeze? It's a problem. So I'm paying for it. I go in and I check it to make sure that it's running. Okay, and so there's pros and cons to this, but in that case, the tenant, they don't necessarily think like we do, the college kids do. So they think that they're saving money, and it spells out in the contract very specifically that if you create mold by turning off the air conditioning or the heat, that I'm going to charge you for the guys in the neoprene suits, you know, that go in and have to clean it. But they don't think that level. So you have to kind of have to think about how you want to set it up. But these are extremely helpful, in my opinion, to help you set up. But yes, we're done with college kids. They got it in their own name. You make a little bit less with college kids. Are willing to pay a little bit more, like 20% more, but they also are a little rougher on the house. So you have to decide if that's your model. So we're wrapping it up here, and this is just talking about building wealth, real estate. We've actually been talking quite a bit about how to build wealth through real estate, and this is really just a 101 class. We haven't talked about flipping. We haven't talked about buying money with hard money loans. We haven't talked about DSCR loans. We haven't talked about a lot of that stuff. That is coming. We can have another conversation about that, but this is how to get started. This is the 101 first-time investor. If you're sitting on some money and you want to get in, whether it's you're vacating the home that you're in and you're going to go into a new home and turn that into a rental, or you're just going to go out and buy a rental, these work. The great thing, like we talked about, is it's not just the appreciation that you're getting on the home. It's not just the rent checks that you're getting on the home. It's also the depreciation model, because that really does help your taxes when it's all said and done. And literally, I mean, the appreciation on some of these homes, especially if you can get in anytime in the near future, you're going to see the homes just continue to go up. And so it's worth your time to try to get in and invest your time in this. And it really does help, like it says right here, it helps diversify your portfolio, because the stock market isn't always going to be there. It's not always going to work. You're not always going to see appreciation there. And so it's worth your time to jump into real estate. Now, this is, you don't have to do this, but this is my YouTube channel. This is where this is going to end up tonight. So if you do want to be on this, I did a first-time homebuyer class on this a couple nights ago, and I actually loaded it up. You can see there's not a whole lot of editing that's going to happen with it, but it does have some of the key information in there as far as the stuff that we're putting together. So if you do want to join the conversation and be a part of it and kind of silence the trolls for me, then that would be helpful too. So
I just wonder where you got your socks. I want to get those socks.
you want the socks?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. They're pretty cool. I do like them myself. I don't know where to get them. Otherwise, I probably would. All right. So last thing but not least is how I work business. I work 100% by referral. I don't get paid by the hour. I don't get paid by the job. I don't get paid. I just only get paid when it closes. And so I do things that are very different than my counterparts. None of my counterparts are putting together anything like what you just had tonight on how to do investments. And so what I'm really trying to do is make sure that I'm serving my clients at such a high level that you refer me. You refer me business, refer me people just like yourselves. I'm not looking for anybody different than you guys. And so if you have somebody that you know that is looking to buy a house, that's what I'm looking for. It keeps me from having to pay for programs and spend my time on the phone cold calling people, which I don't like to do. I'd rather dedicate myself to making sure that you guys are successful, and this is part of it. And so really, these are the resources. The QR code is right on the table right here. This is something that you certainly can take with you and download all of this information right there. And yeah, I'm thankful for the opportunity to have shared with you, and certainly would love the opportunity to help you with your first home, your first investment, whatever it is that you want to do. when it comes to buying real estate. So that's it. Thank you so much for coming out. Yeah. And I'm going to shut this off.